hey everybody, so today we're going to talk about domain and range. What does it mean? How do you find it? Okay? So, first of all, I want you to realize that these two concepts of domain and range go by so many different names, and it can really make it confusing. But probably the most useful names for domain and range are inputs and outputs, respectively. So I made this little table over here to kind of give you an idea of all the different names that domain and range go by. So, and this is probably not a complete list, but here's at least some of the popular ones. So domain, inputs. We use the letter X, typically, to represent the inputs into a function. So X represents an element of the domain. Or we can also call it the independent variable. As far as for range goes, range means what could come out once you put something into a relation or a function. Range means what could possibly come out. So that's why I have outputs for range, or Y is typically the letter that we use to represent what could possibly come out of a relation or a function. And also, one of the hard things for students to realize when they're first learning this kind of thing is that realizing that Y and f of x actually mean the same thing. They both represent the output from a function. And if you notice the little x right there, that's actually the input into that function. The input into this function into the f function is x, and the output is y. Y represents the output, or f of x. This whole thing represents the output. And finally, another name that is dependent variable. All of these are representing the same idea. What numbers can you put into a function or a relation, and what numbers can possibly come out once you make that input? Okay, let's look at some of the different ways that relations or functions can appear, and then just kind of analyze what's the domain and range in each of these situations. So here in example 1, we have an equation. It's kind of just in standard equation form. And in terms of the context of domain and range, what I want you to realize is that this is a linear function and is taking in inputs, and where the inputs go is for x. So here's where the input goes. You would pick a number that you want to put into this function. Say you put 2 or something, then you'd have 2 times 2 here. And then it would be your job to solve for y, to figure out what's the output from this function. When I put 2 as an input, what's the output from this function? Domain is what values are you putting for x, and range is after you do your calculations, what value is coming out from y. Okay? Here is a similar equation, but written in function notation. So this is an equation in equation form, and this standard form, and this is an equation in function notation form. Okay? This one's function notation. The idea is similar. This function accepts as an input x whatever appears inside of these parentheses. When you have something that's written in function notation, whatever's written inside of the parentheses right here, that's the input into the function. So here's the input into this function, and the input is x. F, I always get a lot of questions about what is this f? It's not multiplication, and there's another video about functions too, so if you want to learn more about functions, go check out the functions video. What is a function? Okay. The f is the name of this function. So this function f takes into it as an input x, the domain, and what it does is it will do this calculation right here. Whatever you put into this function is going to get multiplied by 2 and then increased by 1, and that is going to be your output. So this right here represents the output. In this equation, it was here. This is the output. You put a number in, some calculations happen, something happens inside the machine, and the machine spits out an output. Okay? Here, in tabular form, as a table. In a table, on the left-hand side, we have inputs. These are the numbers that you choose to put into a function or a relation. And on the right-hand side of the table, we have outputs. Okay? So what the table is saying is that if you put -2 into this function, what will come out is 1. It's a pairing. It's a pairing of two numbers. A pairing of input and output. When you put -2 in, 1 comes out. When you put -1 in, -2 comes out. A pairing of inputs and outputs. Domain on the left-hand side, range on the right-hand side. Okay, now as a graph. So here is a graph. This also are pairings. There's an infinite number of points in this graph. here, for example, this point right here, this is the point 0, -3. And in an ordered pair is always it's called an ordered pair because it always shows up in the same order, x first, then y. So we have x coordinate and y coordinate, okay? And now think about, use the knowledge that we were just talking about, what do these letters represent? What do x and y represent? Input and output, right? What this ordered pair is telling you is that when you put 0 into whatever function this is, what comes out is -3. This is input, this is output. And that is true for every single point that's on this line. This is an infinite number of points that represents inputs and outputs from into the function and out from the function. Okay? Here is the same information shown as a set of ordered pairs. Obviously not all the ordered pairs because this line is made up of an infinite number of points, but I picked just 3 of them and put them here in this set. And what this means is that this is telling us that whatever this relation is, or whatever this function is, when you put 0 in, -3 comes out. When you put 1 in, -1 comes out. When you put 2 in, +1 comes out. Each one of these ordered pairs has a value from the domain and a value from the range. So on the left-hand side, we have a value from the domain, and on the right-hand side, we have a value from the range. In and out. Okay? And finally, the last example shows us how domain and range can appear as a mapping. So, very similar to the table, actually. Domain on the left-hand side, range on the right-hand side. And if you notice, there's arrows indicating the direction. You put 0 into the function, and what comes out is -3. It's a mapping from the domain to the range. You put 1 in, -1 comes out. Okay? So that's the end of the story for domain and range for today.